Hi, I have a question on how do you make your analysis flow throughout your body paragraph?
So that's going back to, I guess, point 3 of today about the flow of the progression of the evidence. Is that what you mean?
Yep.
Yeah, so in terms of progressing your evidence, I mean, the first thing to do, it's a slightly complicated process actually, but the first thing you want to do is you have the topic sentence, right? You have an idea. And then what you want to do is you want to break that idea up into 3 sub-ideas, okay? So, and this is Tony. So Tony, do you want to give me an example of like an idea or, you know, a theme that you talk about in one of the texts? Because it's way easier to convey.
Let's do Merchant of Venice and the Patriarchal Society.
So the patriarchal society thing, you know, that's a contextual element, and you could argue it's also an element within the text itself, of course. I would say like patriarchal society itself is not like an idea I would have in the topic sentence, but it's certainly something you can refer to as saying, you know, that women were, like Portia, were subject to patriarchal motivations and behaviors, to link it to the rubric, right? And what was the first point you said?
How do I
No, as in, sorry, for that topic sentence. So you said something before patriarchal society.
Oh, I think I just said Merchant of Venice.
Oh, so okay. So one of your paragraphs is about patriarchal control?
Yeah, patriarchal control.
Okay, so let's say patriarchal control is the idea, right? I assume you're going to be talking about Portia a lot there?
Yeah, Portia.
Right, among other characters or how she relates to other characters. So the first thing is, let's break that down, okay? Let's break it down into smaller ideas that are going to make it easy to follow your argument. You're making a claim that there's this that it's exploring patriarchal control, and you'll word that in a way that uses a rubric. Fine. What will we say below that, and what's the order that makes sense? Well, the first thing I would be wondering is, do you want to give me evidence of that patriarchal control, right? Like you're gonna prove it, right?
Yeah.
No, sorry, and that's a rhetorical question. You don't have to actually give me that. You would ask yourself, well, let me give an example of her being oppressed. Because you're saying that the patriarchal control leads to X, right? You might want to say something deeper there with it. The fact that she then self-fashions and she kind of disguises herself as a male judge. Is that what you say in the same kind of paragraph?
Yeah.
Great, so you need to discuss that evolution. Well, isn't step 1 the fact that she's oppressed?
Yes.
So wouldn't you come up with an example of that? Okay, so follow me. I'm saying the first step was to come up with the question of, well, how is she oppressed? Okay, I'm going to provide an example of that. Maybe it's the way her dad talks about her, like she's property. Okay, great, that's your first point. Do you need another example of that? No. What's the consequence of that? The consequence is that she is motivated to self-fashion, to disguise herself as a male, right? She is actually going to try and escape that prejudice by self-fashioning. So now she is pretending to be someone she's not.
Okay.
You see where we're going here? But she was oppressed. The second piece of evidence should demonstrate how she then reverts to, or not even reverts, how she behaves in a way where she is self-fashioning her identity. Self-fashioning is hyphenated.
Yep. So there's that consequence of the previous point.
Yeah, now it's flowing, right? Now it's like, okay, here's a quote and a technique about that, and here's the contextual link. Next point was, well, look, as a result, this has happened. She's now actually pretending to be a male judge. Last point is the significance of it. The third piece of evidence, and again, you might have a fourth point somewhere in there, but you might take a couple of sentences to unpack what we're saying here. The third one could be, well, look, she was oppressed, was the first bit of evidence. She therefore disguised herself as a male, so that's showing how people self-fashion in response to prejudice to escape it. The third point would be, well, isn't it interesting that when she becomes a judge, she's not very sympathetic to Shylock, who's also an outsider?
Yeah.
So isn't there a nice flow of ideas there?
Yeah, there's a really nice flow.
But the point is, they're all saying something different, but there's a clear progression to them, and it wouldn't make sense to lead with the thing I said last. You appreciate that?
Yeah.
So make sure you start early enough in the conceptual timeline. There's a conceptual timeline. You're saying oppression will lead to paradoxically to someone becoming an oppressor or something, okay? She's like, she was the victim, but now she almost is a villain in that she has no sympathy for Shylock, which is ironic.
Yeah.
Now that idea itself takes, you need to think of a good enough idea that can be unpacked in the way we just described. But you have those 3 follow-up pieces of analysis that start, you've got to make sure you choose the right starting point. You don't want to jump the gun because you're missing an opportunity to prove the first mini claim. So your overall claim was what you said at the beginning. Then we said, okay, well, here's how she is oppressed. Let's start there. Here's what she does as a result. And here's why that's significant. And then you apply that process to all of your other ones. I'm not saying it's always going to be consequent significance. That's not a bad way to look at things. You could also say, here's one point. However, this character demonstrates the opposite. So maybe you spend a couple of sentences saying how there's a diversity of experience about the same thing. Then the last piece of evidence is about, well, why is that important? So this happens to this character. However, we then see this, therefore this. It's like, there's got to be that flow on. So the key thing there is to think about the mini points before you start thinking about the quotes. Because a lot of students just like put the quotes all in and they go, oh, I'll just make some points for these. It's like, no, you need to have already thought about the points based on your understanding of the quotes, and then you'll find the appropriate quotes exactly to come in.
Is there a way that you can remove the words like furthermore or
Yeah, sure, just remove them.
All right.
Just remove them and then see how it sounds. It's probably pretty good.
Okay.
Furthermore, don't use similarly because that implies that you're going to say the same point. Contrastingly, these words are good. Contrastingly, by comparison, etc. But they're not like you don't want to use them every single sentence. Like, however, significantly, consequently, right? But I would suggest using them to begin with to ensure that you're doing the right thing. Anyone else got any questions?
Yeah. What words would we use instead of furthermore then, if we're trying to kind of go into analysis more deeper?
Well, I wouldn't get too caught up with the word, to be honest. Like, furthermore, it is bringing in another point, but if you're going deeper, you might say more deeply. Like, you would just start the next sentence with this leads to this. Like, you don't have to overthink the word that's before the comma, but obviously, there are the go-tos of like moreover, furthermore, consequently, more deeply is a good one there. I think that's enough of a range, and then you don't always need one, is the other thing.
Yeah. Okay. And also, I had another quick question just about like your general videos. Would there be more videos coming up with the things where you look at student responses and then you try and edit those type of videos?
Yeah, I'll do another set. I can't guarantee when they'll be released, but we will do more. Have you watched those? Do you find them helpful?
Yeah, I do. So when students submit their kind of responses, I feel like some of the things, their problems, I kind of have the same thing. So it's good to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good to know. Thank you for that. I mean, feel free to send through. Again, don't send through full essays just because we don't have. Well, I as well don't have the time to go through all of that. But you can send through a question and like an example of an introduction, or just send like examples of sentences that you guys are struggling with. You can send it to our email, hello@jedl.com. And when we do those as well, I think there's an actual form to do it. So if you look at the previous videos with the feedback, I think there's a link in there, if I'm not mistaken, that will allow you to submit it. Otherwise, send it directly to us and we can break it down there for you. But don't send full essays, just maximum 1 paragraph or a couple of sentences. But yeah, no worries. But thank you guys so much. Richie's got a question actually. You're doing T.S. Eliot. Well, as I said, the guy who came first in the state for it, he got 100% on that, is taking students through everything to do for the T.S. Eliot essay. So I'd recommend coming to that next Monday. How am I supposed to make an adaptable essay for that? Well, you generally have 1 poem for each body paragraph, 3 bodies, and then you have 2 backups. That's the only exception really, where you need to know 2 to 3 pieces of evidence from the 2 other poems that you aren't using in your draft. But it's a little bit of extra work, therefore. So you have your 3 bodies, 1 body on each poem. You can refer to other poems within those bodies, but minimally. And then you would have 2 backup, not full paragraphs, because you would basically be making the same point. It's just if you got asked about a specific poem that wasn't in your default structure, that you would then know, you already have to know, what does that other poem that I didn't plan to have, which one would that replace? You've got to know what idea is that going to be the same as, and then have memorized 3 quotes for that, but you're going to make the same points. So it's just a little bit of extra work to have those 2 other poems backed up, just in case you're asked about a specific poem. But just because you're asked about a specific poem doesn't mean that's the only thing you talk about. You still can use all the other paragraphs. It's just knowing, if I got asked this poem, which one would that replace? Where does that best fit in my argument? And then problem solved. You just know 3 short quotes from that one with the techniques.
Hi, sorry, I had a quick question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It's about adapting. So in the previous example, you said you highlighted the words stories, confront, and enlighten. And so when you're adapting, is it just using those kind of words interchangeably and just kind of in specific to that question? Is that how we do it? Is that how we approach?
Yeah, well, they're not interchangeable. That's the first thing. You don't just use one as opposed to the other. Like, it's not like sometimes use stories, sometimes use confront. You have to use them at the appropriate times and in the appropriate ways. They all have different meanings, right? You need to relate them together. So when you talk about the storytelling, you need to say, how is the story being told? Well, it's a dramatic mode of storytelling if you're doing The Crucible as a play. Okay, so Miller uses the dramatic mode of storytelling. Then what you need to do is say, okay, well, that's to do with form. The story bit is to do with how, right? That's to do with form. So now we know how we're going to use that throughout our essay. And then in terms of the other words, confront and enlighten, oh, well, that's like the impact. That's the impact. So I need to make sure that I don't use confront and enlighten together ever. I just want to use confront and I just want to use enlighten separately, but I can try and relate them together. So the best kind of response would say something like, it is through the dramatic mode of storytelling directly addresses stories because it's got the word story in it. I'm not going to use a different word. It is through the dramatic mode of storytelling. Now I've said the type of storytelling. I'm just picking up on every little thing there. The dramatic mode of storytelling, what type? That Miller is able to, now I can't just say confront because that would be just repeating the question, right? Is able to viscerally, remember that's like the emotional response you get. He's able to viscerally confront. So I'm answering, how does he confront? Viscerally. He's able to, who is he confronting? He's able to viscerally confront his audience. Now I got to say, with what? What's he confronting us with? See all the little mini questions? With what? What's he confronting us with? What is he confronting us with? Well, he's confronting us with, so he's viscerally confronting us with a representation of collective hysteria as a means or in order to enlighten us about the potential dangers, right? About the potential dangers of ideological conformity.
I see. Thank you so much. And so, like you said before with the mini questions can help with specificity, but it can also help with adapting.
Exactly. So when you go through your drafts and you think, oh, what I've said here is too generic, well, you can ask yourself the mini questions, but the mini questions will, on the day of the exam, will be helpful for breaking down the question. That's where you would use it then.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And so, and so with adapting, then it just comes to how you answer this question. So the who, what, where kind of thing. It's like, in example, we have 2 different questions. One was focusing more on like power and that kind of thing, and the other was focusing more on a specific character and its like traits and that kind of thing. There's still those 3 points: stories, enlightening, and confront. We would still use those, but then we would change up the framework, change up kind of how we're approaching it to answer that question. So that's what you were saying with, you gave an example with ideological conformity and visceral kind of.
Well, that was just the specific ways you would expand on those words, but you're asking if you've prepared for a different type of question, then you get this type of question. It's the same framework in terms of like the way you're structuring your body paragraphs and everything, but it's different wording. It's just the wording that's changing. You're still gonna say the same fundamental things, right? I don't know if that's answering your question though, sorry, I'm just trying to follow. Are you just saying like, if you get 2 completely different types of questions in terms of like your practice essay and your new one?
Yeah. So if you have 2 different questions, and you have like this framework where you have to mention about stories, enlighten, and confront. It's just like you were saying before, you just have to kind of word it differently in that sense. It's all about wording.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right? Like the draft ideally would have already talked about the story type. You might not have worded it that way, but you've got to realize where you have talked about it. Do you know what I'm saying? So you already have the answers in the draft essay is what will happen. That's how you need to think about it. So, oh, I've got the answer of the story, but I never used the word story in my draft. So a lot of people will think, I didn't talk about that. No, you did. You just didn't use that terminology. You didn't frame it in that way. So a lot of people would have talked about form or said like, oh, it's a drama. Okay, that is it. That's dramatic storytelling. So that's what I'm saying. You're saying the same thing. You're just saying it in different terms. So you've got to find out, where does your draft link to these different words? Where have I talked about something that's confronting? Oh, I'll use the word confront in that patch. Where have I talked about something being able to enlighten? Oh, I've talked about how he's like trying to raise awareness. Oh, I could just use enlighten. I could tie that in there. You just have to match up where the key terms would fit into your draft. Make the question work for you. Don't work for the question.